chip shortage has plagued several industries, from the automotive to the consumer electronics industries, are feeding into much higher prices. Technology group Maser estimates that the chip shortage cost the industry $60 billion in less than a year. We do have CEO Prateek Suri joining the show for more. Prateek, thanks so much for your time in that number.
Yes, nearly every electronic device today is powered by semiconductors, and which contains silicon, which is important part in building the integrated chips or the microchips. So what is silicon? Viewers should understand, silicon is a abundant element found in rocks. Now, sand is purified and melted into wafers, So these wafers are the surfaces on which the chips are built. So every small chip, has thousands of transistors in it, which is, as small as 10,000 times smaller than human hair. So now, it's a very complex process. Now let's talk about that 60 billion figure, So there are, certain points and elements which viewers should need to understand, like the demand and how the big factories, like Apple and other mobile makers are giving the planning to the chip makers 1 year in advance. So now, if we talk about Apple, they make 1 year projection with the chip makers like TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor manufacturing companies, and the other one, which is Samsung. So it's not a process that, suddenly there is a disadvantage and they stop the production. Now, let's talk about the 4 bullet points, which made chip shortage and made $2 billion of loss. One is the COVID-19 pandemics. Like, many across the world, COVID-19 pandemic was a financial struggle to every nation. And in the pandemic, there is a working habit we have seen a change, like, working from home, which gave the boost to the OTT platforms and the various electronic devices like LED TV, laptops, and the mobile phones. And there was a seismic shift towards it. And let's talk about the automotive industry, which has hit particularly hard because it scaled down its production because there was no demand in the pandemic. People were not leaving from their house and sitting in their home and watching, the electronic gadgets and everything. This made the demand of automobile very less. In that terms, automobile sector did not give the projections to the chip makers, and that led to the decline of manufacturing, and an increased demand of what is called as electronics has gained to a extreme shortage, which has given the loss to industry.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm just reminding myself back to April 2020 here in this country, where vehicle sales, for instance, fell to near nothing, just as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And just speaking there to the forward planning, because we have seen that industry in terms of new cars and new car production also finding it quite difficult to get back up to levels prior. But I want to speak to you about the situation as it stands right now, when we're looking at the global chip shortage. What does the picture look like now, and how big is that shortage compared to the initial days of the pandemic, when chips were very, very hard to come by?
Okay, so this chip shortage, like I told you last time, that it is a process. It takes time for even a big companies to keep the planning and projections. So now that aftermath of the global awareness, now the companies know what chip shortage is, and the awareness is happening all across the world. And certain countries have started giving the benefits. And in America, they have recently launched a CHIPS Act, which gave the $52 billion boost to subsidiaries to make the fabrication plants in America and certain European countries also. But like everyone says, even a hurry takes time. So it will take, even building a single fab today, fabrication plant takes at least 2 years and $10 billion of money to be built. So, it can take time, but, as the awareness has been, in most part of the world about the global chip, everyone is asking. So, everyone has started working on it. And I think soon it's going to take time, but eventually it will be sorted out.
Mm-hmm. Because more recently there was new worries following the lockdowns in China. We know that Asia is by far the biggest producer and manufacturer of semiconductor chips. And then I did read a report regarding an ingredient that's actually goes into the production of semiconductor chips, and how that ingredient comes from the Ukraine, and whereby we do have 2 companies there in the Ukraine that have stopped production as a result of the war there. Can you talk to me about those two dynamics, the lockdown in China as well as potentially the shutdown of the two companies in the Ukraine? Has that made the situation regarding the industry a little bit worse, or has the effect not been material?
Look, industry situation was already in worse situation, because of chip shortage. But let's talk about China first. China was never a leader or never a manufacturer for the semiconductors. It was always TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and the Samsung, which are the leaders in the world in those far eastern places. I'll give you a short example. There are three types of chips, Chip size, it all depends upon chip size. Like, for example, 3 nanometers and the 5 nanometer chips are the chips which are used in mobile phones and, all the small gadgets, which only two companies in the world are making, which are TSMC and Samsung. Even the Intel is not making. Intel is only making the large chips. Now, China was already dependent upon these chips from the American region, from Intel and TSMC. But when the US put the sanctions on the electronic products, and the China was most suffered, and the prices also inflated a lot in China of electronics. And people started in the factories in the China, what we experienced, they started putting the stock, and they made the artificial supply chain disruptions for the electronic products. Now, if you talk about Ukraine, Ukraine-Russia war, yes, of course it has been affected because, I'll give you another example, something technical example, about the neon gas, Ukraine is one of the largest producers of Ukraine gas. If there is a disruption in UK because of the war, that particular gas has been affected in making of semiconductor chips. Now, once the situation becomes, it's not gonna be easy because we've been watching since more than 60 days now, and the war is not concluded to the end also. But when we talk about, I recently spoke to China, to manufacturers, and in Taiwan and Korea also, everyone is affected by this war, and and the neon gas, this is something technical which people have to research, because people just understand the outward outlay of what is happening in the global chip. But even the smallest component, like the chip, is the nervous system of the electronics these days. And now we study about the neon gas, which is totally dependent upon Ukraine-Russia war.
Yeah, most certainly. Thank you for drilling down into the minutiae for us in terms of the global chip space. But Prateek, we'll leave it there for now. That was Prateek Suri, the CEO at Maser Group.